Chemists use measurements as a way to communicate information. There's really two big categories when I think of measurements. There is a qualitative measurement. And qualitative, maybe you see the word quality in there. These are non-numerical. So these are things that don't involve numbers. And it could be other types of descriptions, just words and observations that involve words. I think of an example, like I could think of if I had a solution and it didn't have very much, it was not very concentrated, I might call it a dilute solution. And that's kind of a qualitative description. And the other type of description, which chemists love, scientists love, is numbers, quantitative descriptions or measurements. And you see the word quantitative there, and these are things that involve numbers, so these are numerical. So in this section, we're going to talk about some of the units that are involved when you make quantitative measurements. So a measurement, really, in order to have meaning, we'll have a number. If we're talking about quantitative, it's going to have a number. And in order for that number to have meaning, it's going to need a unit. So if I just shout out a number 25, it doesn't really mean anything unless I associate something with it. So I associate a unit with it. Now, when the English system is one system of measurement, and then you also have units that are the metric system. And in science, we use the international system, which is based on the metric system. So we're going to focus on some of the units in the metric system. Now you can sit and on this page here, you can compare the English to the metric. So in English, we have miles, feet, and inches, where in the metric system, we would just have something like meters. You could have gallons, pints, and cups, where in the metric system we have liters. You can have pounds and ounces, where in the metric system you would have grams. So we have all of these different units, English and metric. Now the metric system is actually quite useful, and so we are going to focus on that. You do not need to memorize any of the things that relate in the English system or things that relate the English to the metric system. There will be a few things in the metric system I will ask you to memorize. So in the metric system, we have what we call base units. So looking at this chart, this is one place. If you're familiar with it, then that's great. But if not, you will need to make sure you've memorized this. We have these are different properties that we measure, right? So we might need to measure the length. And then here, these are the base units. So this is the metric unit that we would associate with that property. So we call it a base unit because you notice there's no type of prefix, which we'll talk about in a minute, in front of it. So length goes with meters, and meter, oftentimes we don't write out meter. We have symbols, so that would be M, right? And mass is in grams, and that would be G. So let's say I have something that is 25 with an M right there, then this, I'm saying it's 25 meters. So you can understand that. So the metric system, for each of the properties, we have these base units, and we can relate these base units by powers of 10. So here is something. So how we relate it by powers of 10 is by the prefix. And I got a little ahead of myself. This prefix that we use in the metric system is something that is really advantageous over the English system. Now, both require memorizing, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But let's go, for example, to the English system in length. So length, we have inches, feet, and miles. And so if I was doing, I would say, well, how many inches are in a foot? And you would say, okay, there's 12 inches equal 1 foot. Great. And then we could say, okay, well, I know 12 inches are in a foot. How many feet are in a yard? And we could say, okay, there's 3 feet in a yard. And then we go, all right, so yards in a mile. And so then we go, okay, well, my goodness, a yard let's see, how many yards? If we have 1 mile, that would be 1,760 yards. And those are things you kind of like, what? Well, you have to kind of memorize it. And over time, we all know that there's 12 inches in a foot, but 1,760 yards in a mile, that's harder to know. All memorizing. Okay, well then let's go to gallons, pints, and cups. So I could say, all right, so I know a cup is 8 ounces, but let's see, I don't know. I don't even remember how many cups are in a pint. You might know. Are there 2 cups in a pint or 4 cups in a pint? And then how many cups are in a gallon? I think there's like 8 cups in a gallon. Anyway, it's all memorizing. And so let's say I've memorized that there's 8 cups in a gallon, which I think would be right because there's 8 ounces in a cup and 64 ounces in a gallon. So let's say there's 8 cups in a gallon. And then how does that help me remember, though, that there's 1,760 yards in a mile? Like it's not even related. So in the English system, for each of the units, I have to remember and memorize different relationships, and they're all different between length and volume and even within the certain property. Now in the metric system, the really great thing is that they use prefixes to make it bigger and smaller. So instead of having a whole nother unit, like inches are smaller than feet, or yards are bigger than feet, instead of having different units, it's all going to be based on meters, and we're going to add prefixes to make those things, to make that unit smaller and larger. So when we look, here's some of the prefixes, and they're all based on 10, and the 5 I have here are the ones that you're going to need to memorize. So looking at this table right here, here's the prefix, and this is how we would say it in words, so like kilo, deci, centi. Here is the symbol that we would have for those prefixes. And then these 3 columns actually are all the same thing. They're just written in different ways. So the first column, the meaning is in words. So kilo means 1,000. The second one shows you 1,000 as a number. And then the third column shows you in scientific notation, which there is a video if you don't remember. It's exponential notation. If you don't remember it, there'll be a video on exponential notation. So these prefixes we do have to memorize, but the great thing is that's all we have to memorize. So look down here at the examples with me. So here is an example where I put the prefix kilo in front of the word meter. Well, kilo means 1,000, so all of a sudden I have 1,000 meters. So remember, I've made my meter bigger by 1,000. Well, I could take that same prefix kilo and put it in front of grams. Well, kilo, no matter where I put it, is 1,000. So a kilogram is 1,000 grams because kilo means 1,000. All right, well, let's take a different example. So here's deci. So I put the prefix here in front of liter. Deci, if you look up here, means 1/10. So it is 1/10 of a liter. Now, you can also think of these in the opposite relationship. That means the same thing. But if 1 deciliter is small, it's 1/10 of a liter, it would mean that there's 10 deciliters in one of those liters. So you could rewrite it in an opposite way where you have the 1 on the other side. Let me just mention something here as kind of a side. So you have 1 deciliter equals 0.1 liters, right? That's the definition because deci means 1/10. If I wanted to flip it around and have the 1 on the other side, if I divide this side by 0.1, that makes this a 1. But whatever I do to that side, I have to do to the other side. And 1 divided by 0.1 is 10. So when you look at it, I have this guy they're related to each other simply by dividing it. And so you have the 1 on the other side. So back to deci. Deci means 1/10, and there's the 1/10 of a gram. So a decigram is a 1/10 of a gram. And then milli is 1 1/1000th right there. So milli is 1/1000th. A millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter. Or you could write it, that means that if 1 millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter, that means there's 1,000 millimeters in 1 meter. And then milli here, see, 1/1000th, or 1,000 milliliters in 1 liter. And again, let me just show you mathematically so you don't think I'm making stuff up. But if I take this part right here, and that's what I just wrote over here, and then if I wanted to make it, if I wanted to know, well, how many milliliters are in 1 liter, if I divide this by itself, right, 0.001 divided by 0.001 is 1. But then if I do that to this side, I'd have to do it to this side. And 1 divided by 0.001 is 1,000. So that's how I'm getting both of those things. They're related. Now, before I switch this page, there's 2 things I want to tell you. The first thing is you really need to come up here, and this is one of the things you want to focus on and feel confident with, those 5 prefixes. Okay, so what you want to know, what you're going to memorize is that kilo equals 1,000, right? Centi equals 1/100th. So you need to learn that and know those things. Well, I would also know that kilo is K and centi is C, because that's how it will be abbreviated. The other thing that might help you in solving some of the problems is this little guy right here. Usually when I put it in clouds, it's something that's important. And that 1 milliliter is equivalent to 1 centimeter cubed. So 1 milliliter equals a centimeter cubed, or a cubic centimeter, and that's also abbreviated as cc for cubic centimeter. So like in hospitals, if they're talking about cc's, it's an equivalent to 1 milliliter. So if I had 25 milliliters, that would also be the same as 25 cc's. Okay, so on this page, I have 3 questions to kind of review the things that we talked about. You can pause the video and then take a minute and see if you know any of the answers. If not, it kind of lets you know where you can ask a question or maybe what you need to memorize and work on. Okay, so this just says what metric unit represents each of the following measurements. And so all it's asking, length is represented by the base unit meters. Volume is liters. And if you're really being specific, you might have written the abbreviation. Mass is in grams. And I didn't do temperature on the other one, but we'll go ahead and do it now. It is degrees Celsius for the metric system. Question 8 says, fill in the blanks with the correct prefix. So 1,000 means kilo. So if I have 1,000 grams, it's the same as a kilogram. 1/100th means centi. So, oops, I can't put it in there. So 1/100th of a meter is a centimeter. And then 0.1 is deci. So 0.1 liters is a deciliter. Now write the correct prefix. So mega, now I didn't go over mega, but you might have looked it up in your book, and it's 1 times 10 to the 6th. So it's 1 times 10 to the 6 bytes. So a megabyte is, that's mega, so you think about that in computers. That's actually a metric prefix. A kilometer, this would be the other way. We did kilometer up above, but we did kilo, but you see there, kilograms here. You see the relationship with kilo always means 1,000. And then milli is 1/1000th of a meter, because that's what milli means. All right, so metric units take practice, and there is things to memorize, but it really will be worth it in the long run. The more confident you are, the easier it will make some of the problems.